Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bimal Amin, and I'm a member of the Digital Health Policy Team in the Digital Health Center of Excellence at FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health. First, I want to thank Johns Hopkins AITC for their invitation to be a part of the webinar series and letting me talk about predetermined change control plans, or PCCPs in short. Hopefully, by the end of this discussion, you'll walk away with a clear understanding of what they are and how they'll work. Today, I will start with the statutory authorities that helped implement PCCPs and then dive into the guidance themselves, walking through the key components and recommendations. After that, I'll share some implementation data and then open it up for some questions. And if you can, put your questions inside the chat and I'll read them out loud at the end. So let's start with the fundamental question. What is a predetermined change control plan? At its core, a PCCP is the documentation that a manufacturer submits to FDA describing three things: the specific modifications they plan to make to their device over time, the methodology they will use to develop, validate, and implement those modifications safely, and an assessment of the impact those modifications will have. They will allow a manufacturer to say upfront, here are the changes we anticipate making, here's exactly how we'll make them safely, and here's our analysis of the risks. And if the FDA agrees, those changes can be implemented later without triggering a whole new pre-market submission. The 2022 Omnibus Appropriations Bill added Section 515C to the FD&C Act so that changes to a device consistent with a clear or approved predetermined change control plan do not require supplemental submission. The provision applies to all devices and is not specific to software or AI-enabled devices, and applies to both pre-market approvals and 510(k) applications. The agency has recently put out two guidances related to this. The first is Draft Guidance Predetermined Change Control Plans for Medical Devices, which is FDA's current thinking and in draft form intended to provide recommendations on the information to be included in a PCCP for all device types. And the second one is Final Guidance Marketing Submission Recommendations for a Predetermined Change Control Plan for AI-enabled device software functions, which is what we'll focus on today. The scope of the final guidance applies to AI-enabled device software functions that a manufacturer intends to modify over time. Such changes could include if you have collected additional data and plan to retrain specific subgroups or demographics, adjust the weights of hyperparameters, update data processing methods, or even make architecture changes. It describes recommendation on information to be included in a PCCP provided as a part of a pre-market submission. Please note that PCCPs are optional and a tool manufacturers can use when they anticipate needing to update their device over time without submitting a new pre-market submission each time. Lastly, for combination products where you have a device component that also involves a drug or biologic, the guidance generally applies to the device constituent part. But if a modification to the AI component would impact the drug or biologic side of the product, we strongly encourage you to engage with the FDA early. Don't wait until you're ready to submit and come talk to us first. So to recap, an authorized PCCP specifies plan modifications that, if not included in a PCCP, would otherwise require a new pre-market submission. The modifications can be implemented without triggering the need for a new pre-market submission once authorized. And modifications that are not specified in the authorized PCCP could require new pre-market submission. Now let's get into the structure of a PCCP. Basically, this is really the heart of the guidance. A PCCP has three components, and I find it helpful to think about them as answering three questions. The first is the device or the description of modifications. This answers the question, what? What specifically are you planning to change about your algorithm? This needs to be well-defined and specific. The second is the modification protocol. This answers the question, how? How will you develop, validate, and implement those changes in a way that ensures the device is safe and effective? What data will you use? What are your acceptance criteria? And the third is the impact assessment. This answers the question, so what? What are the benefits and risks of these modifications? How do they interact with one another? What's the cumulative impact of implementing all of them? So, how do you actually get a PCCP authorized? The answer is that a PCCP is not a standalone submission. It's included as a part of a pre-market submission for your device and authorized alongside the device itself. Depending on your device, this could be a 510(k) submission, a de novo request, or a PMA, including certain PMA supplements listed above. One nuance I want to flag for those of you thinking about the 510(k) pathway is if you're using a predicate device that itself has an authorized PCCP, you need to compare your device to the version of the predicate before any changes were made under that PCCP, not the current version, the original authorized version. If you already have an authorized PCCP, but you want to change the PCCP, for example, to add new types of modifications that weren't authorized in the previous authorized PCCP, you generally need to submit a new pre-market submission because changes to the PCCP can significantly affect the safety and effectiveness of the device. The appropriate submission type depends on your device and must include the appropriate marketing pre-market submission requirements for the device and a proposed PCCP. There is one exception worth noting. The special 510(k) pathway may be appropriate when the changes to the PCCP involve your own device and your own PCCP, and where well-established methods are available to evaluate the change. The key takeaway here is that PCCPs are a living document. It can evolve, but changes to it are still subject to FDA review. It's not a one-time approval that gives you unlimited flexibility forever. Once the PCCP is authorized and you've implemented a proposed modification, the FDA recommends that the labeling to a PCCP be updated. This includes the following information to help make users aware of modifications that have been implemented and that impact the device use. First, it should include a device description of the implemented modifications, including a summary of current device performance, the relevant data used such as training, tuning, and test data, associated inputs and outputs, validation requirements, and supporting evidence. It should include a description of how the modifications were implemented, and it should include a description of how users will be informed of implemented modifications. For example, through updated instructions for use or a version history. Ultimately, this is about transparency. Clinicians and patients need to know when the device has been updated and what has been updated to the device. In addition, when a device with a PCCP is authorized, FDA recommends that the public-facing decision summary include key information about the PCCP, specifically what proposed modifications are planned, what testing methods will be used, what validation activities and performance requirements must be met before a modification is implemented, and how users will be informed when a modification is made. Lastly, when you submit a PCCP, FDA recommends including a title and version number. We expect the review to be interactive, where the FDA and the sponsors work together to refine the PCCP using existing processes like interactive review and deficiency letters. If revisions are needed, we recommend you submit a clean, updated copy with a current version number. When the PCCP is authorized, it's referenced by title and version number in the device's authorization letter. That creates a clear, audible record of exactly what was agreed to. Generally, a device will have one authorized PCCP at a time, but as I mentioned before, it can evolve through future submissions. And if deficiencies with the PCCP can't be resolved, FDA may clear the device with the PCCP withdrawn. So let's go deeper on each of the three components, starting with the description of modifications, specifically what the manufacturer intends to change about the algorithm. When you describe your proposed modifications, we recommend that each one be well-defined and specific. They should provide enough detail that the specific modifications can be clearly understood, verified, and validated. You should also include performance specifications for device characteristics, state whether the modification will be implemented manually or automatically, for example, if you're doing an over-the-air software update, and specify if it will be deployed globally across all devices or locally. While we understand that you may want to include a wide variety of proposed modifications, we recommend keeping the number manageable. If you include too many, it becomes very difficult to provide the level of detail FDA needs for each one in the modification protocol and impact assessment, and that may complicate the review. Think of it this way. A few well-defined modifications will serve you much better than a long list of vague ones. So to recap, the proposed modification appropriate for a PCCP must maintain or improve safety and effectiveness. They must be specific enough to be verified and validated. And critically, they must keep the device within its intended use and must allow the device to remain substantially equivalent to the predicate device. When you look at the types of modifications that manufacturers have included in their PCCPs, we see a range from retraining algorithms on newer expanded datasets to adjusting performance thresholds, to incorporating additional input signals, to qualifying new compatible hardware. Previously, I had mentioned if you're planning to adjust the weights of hyperparameters, we recommend that you pre-specify the hyperparameter and provide a bounded range. For example, if you're planning to adjust the batch size or learning rate, we recommend pre-specifying the range of values those hyperparameters might take. This not only helps prevent overfitting, but it also ensures that the modifications are specific and verifiable. Now let's talk about the modification protocol, which includes how the algorithm will learn or change while remaining safe and effective. The modification protocol should describe the methods that will be followed when developing, validating, and implementing those modifications to ensure the device remains safe and effective. The methods described in the modification protocol should be consistent with and support the modifications outlined in the description of modifications. The goals of the modification protocol are to, 1, identify the appropriate data, test methods, analysis methods, and acceptance criteria used to develop, validate, and implement all proposed modifications. 2, identify the update process and plans for communication and or training for users when modifications are implemented. 3, ensure that the information that would otherwise be submitted to the FDA is generated by the manufacturer and maintained consistent with record-keeping requirements in their quality system. 4, ensure that the anticipated risks and risk mitigation strategies are identified and included in the impact assessment. And finally, be least burdensome for both the manufacturer and the FDA, meaning it should be traceable, so modifications can be linked to specific verification and validation activities, and specific enough to comprehensively support the proposed modifications. The modification protocol has 4 primary components. First is your data management practices, which is what data you'll use and how you'll manage it. This includes data collection protocols, assurance of data quality, reference standard determination, and information regarding sequestration of test data sets. Second is your retraining practices, which is how the algorithm will be updated. It should identify the objective of the retraining processes, provide a description of the AI model, identify the device components that may be modified, outline the practices that will be followed, for example, data sequestration strategies during retraining, and identify any triggers for retraining. For example, when the quantity of data reaches a certain size or when a drift in data is observed over time. The third is your performance evaluation protocols, which is the test methods, analysis methods, and acceptance criteria that must be met before a modification is implemented. This should include how performance evaluation will be triggered, how sequestered test data representative of the clinical population intended use will be applied for testing, what performance metrics will be computed, and what statistical analysis plans will be employed to test hypotheses relevant to performance objectives for each modification. And fourth is your update procedures, which includes how you'll communicate changes to users and monitor the device in real world after implementation. This should include one, confirmation that the verification and validation plans for the modified version of the device are the same as those that have been performed for the version of the device prior to the implementation of the modifications, or identification of any differences between the two plans. Two, a description of how software updates will be implemented. Three, a description of how legacy users will be affected by the software update, if applicable. And four, a description of how modifications will be communicated to the user, including transparency of any differences in performances or device inputs, and or known issues that were addressed in the update. The third component is the impact assessment, and this describes the proposed modifications, benefits, and risks, as well as how the risks are mitigated. An impact assessment in the PCCP is a documentation of the assessment of the benefits and risks, as well as the mitigation of those risks. It should include, one, compare the version of the device with each modification implemented individually to the version of the device without any modifications implemented. Two, discuss the benefits and risks, including risks of harm and unintended bias, of each of the individual modification. Three, discuss how the verification and validation activities proposed within the modification protocol continue to reasonably ensure the safety and effectiveness of the device. Four, discuss how the implementation of one modification impacts the implementation of another. And five, describe the cumulative impact of implementing all modifications. We understand that predetermined change control plans are relatively new, and you may have questions regarding them. We recommend that manufacturers engage with us early by submitting a pre-submission to discuss their PCCP, where you can obtain feedback on questions related to the proposed modifications, the modification protocol, and the impact assessment. A pre-sub is a way to get FDA feedback on your PCCP before you file your pre-market submission. I can't overstate how valuable early engagement is. The earlier you come to us, the more we can help you shape your PCCP. We want to work with you and not just review your submission at the end. So to give you guys a snapshot of the current numbers of PCCPs that we've had in-house. As of October 2025, FDA has received more than 300 submissions proposing PCCPs, and roughly half of those were pre-submissions or Q-submissions. We've authorized more than 110 devices with PCCPs, and we've established a centralized cross-cutting team dedicated to PCCP reviews to drive consistency. You can expect that it will be reviewed by people who have deep expertise in the specific area and who are applying consistent standards across all submissions. We understand that it can be overwhelming to know where to start when preparing a PCCP, but our goal is to help guide you through this process and make it as clear and straightforward as possible. To this end, the FDA has developed a resource that can assist you in understanding previous PCCPs that were authorized. This database is publicly available on FDA's website and can be found scanning the QR code above. Essentially, what you would do would be checking off the predetermined change control plan authorized and clicking search, and it'll provide you a list of ones that have been authorized. So while I won't go through each, you can find a list of examples of authorized modifications that with the respective pre-market submissions above. To include some, we've seen 510K examples with retraining AI algorithms on additional data sets to improve performance. We've seen de novos with algorithm optimization and retraining, incorporating additional views for radiological devices. And we've even seen PMA examples that were not related to AI-enabled devices, but more so alternate microcontroller components used in ENT devices, to name some. And with that, I want to thank you for all of your time and attention today. While I know I talked through a lot of information, it's important to know that we always appreciate and recommend companies to engage with us early. If you have any digital health related questions, we recommend emailing digitalhealth@fda.hhs.gov. As I mentioned before, the FDA offers sponsors the option of a pre-submission, which is a valuable tool that fosters communication, collaboration, and regulatory alignment between sponsors and the FDA. It's voluntary and does not have any user fees. The pre-submission can help you receive feedback, guidance, and clarification regarding your planned PCCP, regulatory submissions, or even development plans for your medical devices. Please note that this should be done prior to submitting your FDA submission. The feedback is typically provided via a written response, but you have the option to request a face-to-face meeting or even a teleconference. So with that, I just want to thank you guys all. And if you have questions, please let me know. I'll open the floor.
There is one question in the chat from Randall Williams. How should applicants determine what specific types of product software changes rise to the level of a modification requiring PCCP submission beyond changes that are anticipated to impact functional changes in likely safety or efficacy outcomes?
So that's a great question. It's always difficult to determine when a proposed modification might be appropriate. It really depends on the use case. It depends on what you're trying to change as well. We want to make sure that it stays within its intended use. It's something that would require a pre-market submission. And so with that, I don't know if I can give you an exact answer on, exactly what would be appropriate. And would request that sponsors really use a pre-submission to determine. I have listed a couple of examples like that we may have seen for in AI-enabled devices. Something, if you're going to be changing the architecture of the device, if you're going to be changing data processing methods or hyperparameters, specific components of the model itself, this would generally require a new pre-market submission. And it still stays within the intended use of the device. And those are the ones that we've typically seen. If there is one that is impacting safety, this is where I always say, it would be beneficial to reach out with a pre-market or with a pre-sub so that we can provide you the necessary details and what we would think is appropriate for a PCCP or not, depending on what your intended use case is.
Randall says, thanks. That's what he was looking for. There was another question about the slides, and I just wanted everyone to know that the recording of this presentation will be posted on the JH-AITC website within a week. Any other questions?
I know it was a lot of information and it's very dense, but if you do have any questions, please let us know. This is supposed to be interactive and I'll try to help as much as I can.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more, so I take that to mean you were very educational and everybody understands clearly.
I will reiterate, if you do have any questions, I've included my email as well, and we do have our digital health email directory listed above. And that email directory is for any digital health related questions, and we'll try to turn around a response to you guys within 7 to 14 business days. But like I said, we're here for you. We want to engage with you guys early so we can help you through the process and hopefully, you take that advice as you're developing your devices.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.